welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Judy and I like history, travel, and finding out how people and places work. I also like technology and finding out what makes things work. Today I'm going to take you on a boat ride along the Canal du Midi in southern France. So come along with me, the armchair traveler, to learn about Louis XIV's fabulous bit of 17th century infrastructure that is still in use today. Enjoy the ride. A lock is a device used to raise or lower a boat craft between stretches of water of different levels on a river or a canal. Water runs downhill and most people, except daredevils in movies perhaps, wouldn't care to try to jump down and probably cannot jump uphill on a canal. All locks, whether ancient or modern, have three pieces. Two openable gates with sluices to let the water in and out, marked in red arrows on my image, and a chamber in which the water level can be raised or lowered, marked with the blue arrow. This Google Earth image of the Sweet Lock near Carcassonne gives you an idea of the setup. The locks are used to make a river more easily navigable or to allow a canal to cross land that isn't level. Later canals use more and larger locks to allow more direct routes to be taken and to hold bigger boats. Notice that the canal is barely wider than the boat here. The builders of this canal decided on the length and the width of locks based on several factors. One of them was what was possible in the area selected, and the types of boats that they thought would probably use it. There is an additional practical consideration for modern boaters or would-be boaters to keep in mind. The depth of this canal is generally around 6 feet, more than deep enough to drown in, but in a drought, water levels might be somewhat lower, which is why canal and riverboats sometimes are forced to cancel trips. These dimensions were picked to ensure that the canal could handle typical commercial and passenger vehicles of the time. This was the 17th century, allowing for efficient transport of goods and people between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean. My visit to Carcassonne included two big-ticket items to check off, the fortress and a boat ride. My first job was actually to get to Carcassonne. Although both Narbonne, my home base for this part of the tour, and Carcassonne, today's destination, are on the Canal du Midi, it is much faster to take a train, half an hour, portal to portal. As it turned out, I did have to stop to admire these flowers planted just outside the train station, which itself is located just beyond the canal. The Canal du Midi is one of the most iconic waterways in France. It was constructed in the 17th century as an enormous infrastructure project designed to connect the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean by water, reducing the need to sail around Spain. It was also designed to show the might, the power, the wealth, and the accomplishments of Louis XIV, France's Sun King, who sponsored the project. Louis was no fool. He may have sponsored and encouraged the project, but he didn't pay for it. Instead, he allowed himself to be persuaded by the smooth talk of one of his tax collectors, Pierre-Paul Riquet, in the 17th century. You might be asking yourself, where did he get the money and what was in it for him? As it turned out, he probably got the money by chiseling off the taxes he was collecting and not turning everything over to the king. He also owned the land where the canal was built. This was an enormous project for any time. Take a look at how long it takes to build a road in 21st century America for comparison. Around 12,000 people worked on the project. There were quite a few engineering problems, which not only made locks, 91 of them necessary, but also a large reservoir or artificial lake to feed water into the canals and a system of feeder canals. I imagine Riquet harbored notions of wealth beyond the dreams of avarice. In hindsight, which is always 20/20, that was probably silly and he didn't really understand who he was working with. He invested much of his fortune into the project and faced a lot of financial challenges during construction. While he had the king's support, including not just from Louis XIV, but his finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the project was extraordinarily expensive and full of logistical difficulties. Riquet died before it was completed, and before he could enjoy its success or any financial benefits that might have followed. After his death, the canal's management passed to the French state and his heirs. While his family did get some recognition and compensation, they never did achieve any significant wealth from the canal's existence. I found this tour company on the internet, and I'm always somewhat suspicious of rave reviews, but I can confirm that every good review here was absolutely accurate. I grew up in mostly landlocked Indiana and never been on a canal boat, so I was a little wary, but since the company had been in business for 15 years and got all of those rave reviews and offered narration, I thought it was probably a pretty good idea. This is Le Coquin. The name seems to refer to a place of idyllic existence. That idyllic existence was a bit tempered by the little sign beneath the roof that says life jackets. Notice how far below ground level the canal is at this point. They made a cut here. The only way to move from higher ground to lower ground was through a lock. The canals themselves needed to be perfectly flat or all the water would run downhill. This is one of the many lockkeeper houses, now no longer in use for its original purpose, but converted into a cafe and bar. The building sits just beyond the towpath. Every lockkeeper's house shows you the name of the lock or the name of its original purpose. The Penchard de Foucault was originally a port with 3 locks and served as a key point for transporting travelers and goods back down to Carcassonne. Over time, it became a junction between the original 17th century canal and a later addition made in the 19th century under Napoleon. Today, this is a popular spot for boat tours, picnics, and even jazz concerts in the evenings. The words you see above the gatekeeper's door show you the distance to the next lock in each direction. Notice that the next lock going back to Carcassonne is listed at 3,440 meters. Horses and oxen were commonly used to tow barges along the canals in France and in the United States. They would trudge along the towpaths which ran parallel to the canal, pulling the barges with ropes. However, in some cases, in narrower or more difficult sections, manual labor, that means human beings, were employed to push or pull the barges along, either with poles or ropes. The towpath today is a hiking and bicycle trail. Moving along the canal and looking at the bridges and overpasses gives you some idea of just how deep the cut must have been to build this canal. Watching the people on the towpath and the water gliding part was the relaxing or idyllic part of the trip. The excitement was on the horizon, however, although it wasn't obvious, at least not in this distant view, which shows us approaching the Écluse de la Douce, which just means sweet lock. This closer view of the lock shows the water spilling over the gate. The chamber behind those gates was full up, and the water pressure must have been substantial. The first step is to drain the chamber, which means opening up some sluices to let the water out of the chamber and into the canal so the boat and the chamber are at the same level. Hardly any one of these locks is staffed. It's set up so the boaters can do the work themselves. Whoever's on the boat has to hop off, run ahead a bit on the towpath, and open up the gate. Afterwards, the boat has to be maneuvered safely into the chamber. Since the chambers are normally much narrower than the rest of the canal, someone generally has to jockey the boat safely into place, in this case using a long pole. The next step is to close the gates behind and run forward to the second set of gates and open up the sluices to allow water from the higher up part of the canal to fill the chamber and raise the water level. From there, you get to wait for a while for the water to rise. The excitement in the boat was rising, and a fair number of people got up out of their seats from under the awning to watch. Once the lock is filled, the gates can open up. Sometimes that filling involves a lot of water splashing, as the couple in this photo found out. France has a tradition of locating hotels next door or sometimes very close by train stations. During my first visit to France in 1970, I often stayed at the local Hôtel de la Gare, which in 1970s France often meant there was a sink in the room along with a bed, but the toilet and shower were down the hall. To say that these establishments were modest was probably being not just generous but kind. This one, the Hotel Terminus, is many steps up from those old Hotels de la Gare. It was built in 1913 and showcases Belle Epoque architecture. Regrettably, and a little surprisingly, when I checked the current status, I read it's been permanently closed. My schedule didn't allow for a sit-down meal in Carcassonne, which was a real shame because Carcassonne is actually known for cassoulet, a hearty traditional stew made with white beans, duck or goose, pork, and sausages. The Carcassonne version often includes partridge or other game meats, reflecting its historical roots in rural cuisine, along with a glass of one of the excellent local red wines. This was not to be. I had places to go and things to see, and so do you. Come back next time to tour the fortress of Carcassonne, a remarkable medieval complex, with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Thank you for traveling with me today. This year, we'll be making a grand tour of France, not just the famous cities, although we'll hit them too, but some lesser known gems. The basis of all my French posts is my personal on-the-ground visits, extending over a period of more than half a century. I took a lot of pictures, I asked a lot of questions, and I tried to write down the answers. Things change, even in a puny human lifetime, and most French cities are considerably older than I am, so a great deal of research goes into each one of these presentations. Most of that work never makes it into the videos except as an incidental reference or a mention. You might wonder what happens to the rest of it. Well, I write it down, and sometimes, if it seems interesting enough, and I admit that is a matter of taste, I write it up and post it separately. If you want to know more, check the description box below. I'll put in links from time to time for more information. Sometimes this will be information I dug up, other times it'll be links to what I hope are honest, reputable sources. In addition, I have a travel blog, a health and wellness blog, because travel is easier if we're healthy, and can be found on Blue Sky and Facebook. The addresses are all to the side of this video. Finally, I have a favor to ask. If you enjoyed my post, please like, subscribe, and share. This will help my channel grow. Thank you, and keep on traveling.